Americans have always boasted of a love affair with the automobile, but they've always been reluctant to admit that the quickest exotic sports cars always seem to come from Europe. Now they may have something exotic of their own, a contender for title of the ultimate driving machine and the fastest production car in the world. It's American-made. It's the Vector car.
This has got to be one of the most unhinged companies in American automotive history. I mean, the founder is probably one of the most unhinged men that I have ever researched. And quite frankly, the more research I do on this company, and one of their cars in particular, the more insane everything gets. And one question leads to another, which leads to another series of questions. It's a vicious cycle. This was supposed to be like an easy 8-minute video about a wacky car from the late 80s, early 90s, but the deeper I dig, I just keep finding more and more unbelievable information about this company and its history. I mean, this company was technically founded in 1971 and only shut its doors for good in 2021 when its founder died. I mean, that's 50 years of history, 50 years of being in business and designing and producing cars. And guess what? In those 50 years, they only produced a total of 37 in 50 years. That's a long time and not a whole lot of cars. The founder of this company is the epitome of making yourself the main character in life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is everything you need to know about Vector Aeromotive. Really quick before getting into the history of Vector Aeromotive, there's one thing you need to know about its founder, Jerry Weigert. This man loved planes and aerospace. It's a key part in how he designed cars. Also, just a quick disclaimer, some of the information in this video might not be 100% accurate. With all the research I've done, I can't find rock solid numbers on everything, so I'm just going with the most common figures that I've seen. Let's start digging into the history. Vector Aeromotive can trace its roots back to Vehicle Design Force, which was founded by Jerry Weigert in 1971. Jerry studied interior and vehicle design and ended up interning for GM, and he would also consult for each of the big three, GM, Ford, and Chrysler. Now, Jerry didn't want to just be a yes man, so he eventually turned down a job at GM and went on and founded his own company where he would be in charge of everything. He was in charge of design and production and blah blah blah, literally everything. All he wanted to do was build cool cars, and Jerry had an obsession with airplanes, essentially. He really liked fighter jets. After founding his company, Jerry teamed up with the legendary Lee Brown, who had famously customized and painted some of Steve McQueen's personal vehicles, including one of his Ferraris. Anyways, these guys teamed up to design the Vector, a groundbreaking car based on a Porsche chassis, and this car was intended to house various engines. It was originally intended to house a dual overhead cam flat six Porsche engine, and at some point there were talks about it also housing a Wankel rotary engine, because I mean, who doesn't love the spinning Dorito? A full-size fiberglass shell of the car appeared on the cover of Motor Trend magazine in 1972. An actual concept car, minus all the bits to make it move and make noise, was displayed at the 1972 LA Auto Show. Despite all of the anticipation and excitement around the car, it didn't enter production, probably because of the $100,000 price tag in the 70s, which is over $500,000 today. And also due to a lack of funding, which, by the way, that'll be a common theme in today's story. Now, after a while, Lee Brown ended up leaving the design team in 1977, and Weigert was forced to relinquish ownership of the design and renamed the company from Vehicle Design Force to Vector Car. From here, Jerry would hustle for funds and desperately scrape money together, and eventually, when he had amassed enough funds, he would go on to design and build the W2, the Weigert Twin Turbo, a concept car. Now, During this time in the 1980s, Jerry would seek out investors and more money to actually get his concept car into production. He would end up going to car shows and doing just about anything he could to stir up some sort of publicity and attract more investors. His W2 concept car made it onto the cover of Car and Driver magazine in 1980, which garnered him a lot of attention and a lot of private investors. Real quick, we're just going to take a beat and talk about this cover of Car and Driver magazine. That car there, that's the W2. And that lady next to the car, that's a model. She would end up marrying Jerry Weigert, which, okay, this is insane right off the bat. Because, like, how much riz did this guy have to lay down to pull that off? I mean, this dude was hustling. Not just for money, but for honeys, too. What other man could pull off scraping together millions of dollars to fund his dream car and also bag a model at the same time? The dude had the charisma of Ryan Reynolds and the self-confidence of Kanye West. And that's just a dangerous combination, okay? In his search for funds, Jerry allegedly put 200,000 miles on this concept car. A concept car, okay? That is absolutely insane. Why did he put almost 200,000 miles on this car? Because, and I quote, "We were too poor to trailer it." They couldn't afford to trailer the car to car shows and events, okay? They were desperate for money, so he just drove the thing all across the country, showing it off to whoever he could. Kind of an unheard of thing. This dude was a baller. He secured funding for his dream car by partying and bumping elbows. But not just with anyone, though. He partied with NBA team owners. He was wining and dining Raquel Welch, an actress in the 60s and 70s, I think, and just cruising around LA at night with, and you will never guess this, go ahead in the comments below, take a guess as to who he was just cruising around late at night with in LA. I'll wait. You back? Well, whoever you guessed, you're wrong. It was Robin Williams. Robin fucking Williams. You know, Genie from Aladdin, Mrs. Doubtfire, the guy from Flubber. Oh, and also, just because he could, he sued the Goodyear Tire Company. Yes, the tire company. Why would he do that? Well, that's because Goodyear was naming their new tire Vector. And guess what? He won. He won the lawsuit. He raised millions of dollars through private investors and also his lawsuit. But unfortunately, it just wasn't enough to get the car into production. In 1987, people wanted this car. Everyone was so excited about it because not only was the design eye-catching and breathtaking, it was just something that no one had ever seen before, and it was going to be the American Supercar. But after years and years of displays and shows and, whatever, there was no word anywhere of whether this car would actually make it to market. And people were starting to become skeptical and quite doubtful, in fact. Financial setbacks forced Weigert to dissolve Vector Car, and like the main character of an action movie, this man just would not lie down and die. I mean, the very next year, in 1988, Jerry Weigert would found a publicly traded company which he would name Vector Aeromotive Corporation. The dude loved planes and cars, so Aeromotive. We are going to design fighter jets for the streets. With Jerry allowing his company to be publicly traded, this would allow him to gain millions of dollars of funding, because his company was available on the stock market, and people wanted his cars. They thought they were just the craziest thing, and people were so excited for it. With funding secured, Weigert would finally be able to develop and produce his dream car, a lightweight, mid-engine, twin-turbo V8 rocket ship for the streets, the W8. Now, quite frankly, at first glance, this thing looks like the bastard child of a Lamborghini Countach and a Ferrari Testarossa with just a little sprinkle of Pontiac Fiero in there. But to be fair, the design language of the time, the late 80s, early 90s, for fast cars was triangle go fast. They made triangles. The W8 would be based on the earlier W2 prototype, and it would take design cues from the Alfa Romeo Caribou and fighter jets of the era because, well, Jerry loved space jets and cars. This thing was built using state-of-the-art aerospace materials. The chassis was comprised of a riveted aluminum honeycomb structure bonded to the lightweight carbon fiber and Kevlar body with epoxy, making this thing incredibly lightweight. Now, what powered this late 80s, early 90s space pod? Well, that would be a 6-liter small block Chevy based twin turbo V8. This is a sleeved race engine with forged and stainless steel internals. On its own is already insane, but it was a dry sump twin turbo V8 in the late 80s. And this thing also had Airflow Research heads, which that company is still in business today, and you can go buy a set of heads from them right now. To cap all of it off, this thing had not one, but 2 Garrett turbochargers that were intercooled, pushing between 8 and 14 pounds of boost. This absolutely absurd power plant made an advertised 625 horsepower and 649 pound-feet of torque at its lowest boost setting, which was just 8 pounds. And you crank that little boost knob all the way up to 14 pounds. And this thing would make 730 horsepower, all of which could be produced on pump gas. 80s and 90s pump gas. That is absolutely insane. Allegedly, this engine setup made almost 1,200 horsepower on the dyno. But there's nothing that I have seen that actually confirms this number, so we're just going to stick with the 725 and 730 horsepower figures. What actually made this thing move? That would be a highly modified, albeit an ancient, GM Turbo Hydromatic 425, a 3-speed automatic transmission that was originally used in the 1966 to 1970 Oldsmobile Toronado. That thing was front-wheel drive. The only stock thing about the transmission was the case. Everything else was changed or modified in some capacity. This thing had an advertised 0 to 60 of 3.8 seconds, but in testing with, I think it was Motor Trend and Car and Driver, they were only able to get a 4.2 second 0 to 60, which still kind of ridiculous for the 90s. Now, this thing had an alleged top speed of 218 miles an hour, and maybe also even 242 miles an hour, which for the time was an absolutely ridiculous claim because the 200 mile an hour barrier hadn't even been broken yet. And this guy was out here claiming, yeah, this car that I'm making, yeah, it does 200 and almost 50 miles an hour. Neither of those top speeds were actually confirmed, but in limited testing from actual owners of the cars, the highest speed they were able to achieve was 180 something miles an hour, which, cool. Now, in the quarter mile, this little space pod could run it in just 12 seconds between 118 and 124 miles an hour, which, that's quite impressive, considering this was a production car. Let's move away from the nerdy stuff and talk about the interior. And the interior is also quite ridiculous. It most definitely embodies the fighter jet spirit, where it got a lot of inspiration from. This thing had an absurd amount of cutting-edge technology inside of it. The interior of the car was inspired by a fighter jet's cockpit. I mean, of course, right? Analog gauges? No, that's garbage. Get that out of here. Normal switches, buttons? No, get those out of here. Just about everything on the dashboard of this car pulled from an airplane, or at least sourced from manufacturers that made parts for airplanes, fighter jets specifically. You got a massive digital gauge cluster ripped straight from a fighter jet, an engine hour meter. Oddly enough, you got a breaker panel next to your gauge cluster so that you can reset your circuits because we don't need fuses. Breakers are better, which arguably I would agree. You also got a compass, and you got a 10-disc CD changer. This man put a 10-disc CD changer in his fighter jet inspired sports car. And of course you also had some HVAC controls. The interior of this car is just as breathtaking. I mean, it's kind of just a triangle with some wheels stapled to it, but I mean, I can't do it justice and describe what this thing looks like. I mean, just look at it. Honestly, just look at that. What is that? That's not a car. One of my favorite features of the car is its drop-down headlights. Pop-up headlights are cool and all, and I love pop-up headlights. But, and hear me out, pop-up headlights, but upside down. A total of 23 W8s were produced from 1990 to 1993, originally priced at $225,000 in 1990, and increased as production continued, finally arriving at an astonishing $450,000 in 1992. Primarily because the company was burning through its money and it had to compensate some way, so the price of the car just kept increasing and increasing. It's 1992, and now it's time to get to probably the most insane part of this story, okay? It's 1992. Jerry Weigert structured a deal with Chrysler to buy the company Lamborghini from them. The old tractor company that started making sports cars because Ferrari sucks. Why did he want to buy Lamborghini? Well, he wanted to secure a steady stream of revenue for his pet project. Why else? Why else would a man go buy a luxury exotic sports car company? Because he just wants to build a cool car, man. How is he gonna do that? How is he gonna get the money for it? Buying one of the most insane exotic sports car companies out there. That's how. The same year that Jerry Weigert structured this deal, he would also decide to end production of the W8 in order to pursue his next pet project, an evolution of the W8, the WX3. Jerry and his company produced two prototypes of this car, a coupe and a roadster version, which he would take to the 1993 Geneva Auto Show. And Weigert yet again, needed some investment to get his new car into production. Just days after returning from the auto show, Weigert was wined and dined by an Indonesian company called Megatech. And, desperate for funding, Jerry allowed them to buy into Vector Aeromotive with a controlling interest, meaning they got to make decisions. They got to decide things. Megatech had promised to provide the funding and the resources to get the WX3 into production, but the investors were a little more than shady. These guys are just a whole story on their own, and I'm really not going to get into it, but basically all you need to know is these guys were high-level, white-collar criminals. I mean, one of these guys was even convicted for unaliving the judge who found him guilty of a multi-million-dollar real estate scam. After pumping a few $1 million into Vector Aeromotive, Megatech cut off funding and Weigert was forced to lay off employees, let his bills pile up, almost bankrupting his company. Now, during this time, Megatech would undercut Jerry Weigert and snatch the Lamborghini deal out from under him. In March of 1993, Vector's board of directors would ask Weigert to essentially resign and give up control of the company and act only as the sole designer for the company. Just design cars. He doesn't get to make any decisions. He doesn't get to do anything. He just designs cars. That's it. And of course, Jerry refused. What was the board's response to that? They voted to fire him, which they did successfully.
The last thing they want is a power struggle with entrenched management.
The deal is off if you come with it. The board expects your resignation in 30 days.
But you can't do this to me. I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
Of course, in retaliation and true main character fashion, Jerry Weigert would hire armed guards, change the locks on his factory, and barricade himself inside because he could. Lawsuits were filed by Megatech and Jerry Weigert, and unfortunately Jerry Weigert would end up losing the first round of lawsuits. Megatech would take control of Vector Aeromotive and move what remained of the company from California all the way to the opposite side of the United States to Florida, where the company would share an office with Lamborghini. Under new leadership, Vector Aeromotive would abandon its all-American fighter jet-inspired heritage and design the M12. Loosely based on the WX3, but utilizing a version of the Lamborghini Diablo's V12. Now, how did Vector plan to pay for these engines, you ask? Well, at first it was with money, but they were struggling to do so. So, what they ended up doing is trading Lamborghini a W8 for some of their engines. That's right, they traded a car for engines for their next car. The M12 would actually get produced, and it was only produced from 1995 to 1999, and only 14 cars made it out of production. Vector Aeromotive would also end up designing one more car, the SRV8. And just days before its first public appearance and its unveiling, Jerry Weigert would rise from the depths and take back his company with a lawsuit. The SRV8 never saw the light of day. They had a prototype car ready to show the world, and Jerry Weigert showed up like the Undertaker.
Oh my God.
And just said, no, not today. We're not doing that. And took his company back. So in 1999, after winning the lawsuit, Vector would shut its doors, And Jerry Weigert would get his company, some cars, and 15 trailers worth of equipment back. From 1999, Jerry Weigert would continue to release concepts, and in 2007, he showed up again at the LA Auto Show with a new prototype, the WX8. Again, this car was never actually produced, and Jerry Weigert was hustling for funds and doing everything he could to actually get the car into production. And as far as I can tell, the last he was actually heard of with the car was in 2018. And that was it. January of 2021, Jerry Weigert would pass away, leaving behind a legacy akin to that of a Netflix series riddled with just a ridiculous amount of drama and a twist ending that absolutely no one expected. But this man has gone down in automotive history as one of the most insane and unkillable men. He's kind of my role model now because that man didn't let anyone tell him no. He accomplished what he wanted to. He didn't care what it took. He just did it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was everything you need to know about Vector Aeromotive. This whole story, it all seems so unreal. It's crazy that this is real, true, actual American automotive history and not just a story. Like, this is fact. Anyways, check out some of my other videos. They're going to be up here somewhere. There's probably a playlist. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But check those out, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
The primary reason the Vector was designed was to be a challenge to European dominance of the exotic car, luxury car market segment. And this car represents a status symbol for America in the automotive area. It's a high-technology vehicle using more advanced and sophisticated components than cars in this category. And it's unique. It's a very special machine for a very special person that's looking for something more advanced and practical.